a tweet that was put out by the Vote Leave official Twitter account. They said
Leave EU, wasn't it?
Leave.eu, I beg your pardon. We're proud to launch this new initiative calling on all churches across England to mark the first morning of our independence with the sound of bells ringing. Just as up until there, I don't have a problem with that tweet. It's fine. If you want to, you're happy, you want to mark it, fine. It's the rest of it that gives me a spot of bother, just as we did upon the news of the Allies' victory in 1945. Let's celebrate our newfound independence. To make any connection between our membership in the last 40 years with, a union that was created to form peace post the 1945 war, a union that, regardless of what you think of it, I fully respect your views and wanting to leave it. And we are leaving, so, there's no arguments from me there. But a union that has seen, us prosper and the EU prosper, to compare that to a world war where millions of people were slaughtered and butchered is, frankly, in bad taste.
It's obscene.
I think.
It's profoundly offensive.
Well, it's leave.eu, that, did you say?
Yeah, it's leave.eu.
Well, they've always been...
Yeah, I mean, they're always like the outliers, I guess. But it is... I think it's... I think that we have to appreciate, and particularly leavers should appreciate, be gracious in victory and everything, that there are millions of people up and down the country who will be feeling incredibly sad on the 31st of January, that something that was very important to them, their EU citizenship, our membership of the EU, is being taken from them without their consent. Now, that is how democracy works. We can't have any complaints about that, as Alexis says, but to rub our noses in it by acting as though this is a great day forward that we can all sort of celebrate and participate in this sort of union of joy is in profoundly poor taste. I will never support Brexit. I will never like it. And millions of people like me feel the same. It's going to happen. That's enough.
Olivia, do you think there should be a party?
Well, I think people want to hold their own parties to celebrate leaving the European Union.
But we're talking about an official celebration in Parliament Square.
Something in Parliament Square.
Yeah.
I think I agree that the bells tolling out across the country is a bit of a mad suggestion. And as Jonathan says, I think leavers should be gracious in victory, and I don't think that sort of celebration should be forced upon Remainers. Whether there's a party in Parliament Square, I mean, I don't think that would be particularly in poor taste. I think that's, that democracy...
I mean, here's some... Sorry to interrupt, but here's some, looking at what's coming in. And I'm... Personally, where I stand is, go ahead, knock yourselves out. If you want to have a party, have a party.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have a counter demo to match it, and we'll have bigger numbers.
I couldn't really care less if you want to have a party. I know for some people it'll be a significant day. If some people have waited 40 years for this day, and they won the argument, they won the elections fair and square. Well, we're going to talk about the possible release of the Russia interference report in the referendum, which we still haven't seen. And Brandon Lewis this morning still couldn't give us an answer about when it's going to be released. But here's my slight problem, is the people who want to have a party, the majority of the tweets that are coming in here are not saying, well, yeah, I think it'll be a nice day. We should celebrate a new beginning or something. Here's something from Ben, could be a bot, saying, of course we should. When you're leaving a Nazi dictatorship, it's time to celebrate big.
That's obscene.
I mean, I'm just kind of, a lot of the tweets coming in are basically of that ilk.
I think
this
is one of the moments where it's important to remember that Twitter isn't representative
of course, and you're absolutely bang right. Thoughts on Jess Phillips, Jonathan?
Well, it's interesting because there was a quite a high-profile Conservative pundit who was telling me a couple of days ago that the Tories don't fear Starmer and they do fear Phillips, which I was quite surprised by because Starmer is, obviously he comes across as having huge gravitas, very sort of prime ministerial, huge kind of like an intellect, a great backstory. He's been tested. Well, he's been tested. He's been tested in the public sphere, obviously as the head of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and also he has a forensic eye for detail. And these are all things which will reassure people, because what people are fundamentally looking for is a kind of moral and political authority, if you like. They want to know that someone knows what they're doing. I think that's one of the most important things. But obviously, Jess Phillips very different character, can reach the parts that other people can't reach, has huge popular appeal, has the common touch, so to speak, and can really deliver a speech. And we've seen so many of her speeches in Parliament go viral because she's funny, she's on point, she gets it. She gets what real people go through in a way that other people don't. But on the other hand, she's completely untested. She's extremely young. She's still way short of 40, which is still very young in this day and age to lead a political party. She's never sort of shadowed a big department, for example. She's got no front bench experience. And I kind of think that it's a little bit premature in a sense. And there's obviously, because she has been able to get this huge profile for a backbencher, there might be a little bit of cockiness that says that you can go from that to therefore sort of being able to be the next Prime Minister. I think that there has to be an interim stage, which means that she cuts her policy teeth on a big department. She is tested in the media on this issue and this department. She gets her public policy proposals in week after week. She has to make difficult decisions, because when you're a backbencher and you can just make grandstanding speeches, you don't need to make difficult decisions. And then, she'll be ready maybe in a few years' time, but I'm not sure. I think it'll be a real gamble to go on Phillips right now.
Olivia, Jess Phillips seems to have the catchiest slogan so far, which is "Speak Truth, Win Power," which seems to have struck a note with quite a few people. She seems to have that reach. We've seen the speeches from a very impassioned. Do you think perhaps, I know this might be a leading question, it's just my opinion, I love her passion, but I think sometimes you want to be cool and calm and be able to make your point without the viewer, especially since he's been watching a lot of Parliament, TV in Parliament. My worry is that she gets very, very emotional very, very quickly. And I wonder whether that would be a hindrance rather than... It's all right from a backbencher when they stand up and they get passionate about something. But if you think about it day in, day out, in front bench politics, PMQs, you can't turn it up to 11 every single time.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think what she's gone for, really, I think her pitch is, I will be the Labour Party's Boris Johnson, in a way. In the way that Cameron said, "I'll be your Blair" to the Tories, she's saying, "I'll be your big personality. I'll be the one who makes people laugh. I'll be kind of up for reaching out to people who knock on the doorstep and talk to someone who you would never talk to before." It's quite interesting when you see funny little videos of Boris talking to someone who he massively disagrees with, and he just manages to kind of pull it off. And I think, and the sort of optimism and kind of humour, all of that, I think she wants to be Labour's Boris Johnson. But I think, as you say, I think that Boris has learned over the years to cool it sometimes. He's managed to get across this. A lot of people said that he couldn't really do the kind of business-like, professional, prime ministerial vibe, and he has learnt that over the years, whereas, as you say, I'm not sure if Jess Phillips has. And I saw her, for example, on the Andrew Marr show last week. She was on, and so was Keir Starmer, and Keir Starmer was just so across the detail, just seemed so incredibly well prepared. And watching Jess Phillips, it felt like, oh, poor Jess, she hasn't had time to prepare. But presumably she had the same amount of time as Keir Starmer to prepare, and she just didn't have all the details to hand, and she wasn't quite sure what she thought about quite a lot of things.
So Boris Johnson, she kind of wings it because she knows that
yeah.
she's good, but that's not going to cut it when you're leader of the opposition, a potential Prime Minister. You need to know. And
Boris Johnson has now
everything.
had some experience, so he's not quite such a winger of it.
Jonathan, the truth is that I think it was Naomi Smith who mentioned it in a podcast, Best for Britain CEO Naomi Smith and friend of the show, that Labour need a swing greater than the 1997 Blair landslide victory in order to regain power in 2024. This is also before the redrawn boundaries, which are going to make a difference to the number of votes that Labour need to win in future elections. So we are talking about a monumental task. I think they have to win back something along the lines, depending on whether you count the Sinn Féin seats and the Speaker or not, but something along the lines of about just over 120 seats they need to win back in order to get a majority of one. It's a monumental task. So the only person, actually, to be fair to him, across this leadership debate who has talked consistently about cross-party corporations has been Clive Lewis, and he doesn't look like he's going to get enough to move on to the next stage. But how important will it be for the next Labour leader to be able to work with SNP, with those votes up in Scotland? A lot of Scottish people who were interviewed after the vote had to hold their nose and vote SNP because they felt they couldn't vote Labour and also they couldn't vote Conservative. Is there a leader who can get those votes back from Scotland? Because if Labour are going to win, they have to get seats back from Scotland. They're going to have to get that red wall back. Who is best placed to do that, in your view?
Well, I think the point is that we need to be asking that question. I think the problem is that too many people in the Labour Party are saying, who best represents my opinion? That's the person I want. Now, that to me is the height of self-indulgence. We need to be asking, who is the person who is going to be able to win back the seats we've just lost and then win more seats? Who is the person who can appeal to Tory voters who left the party in 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019? Who is the person who's going to be able to unify the country? Who is the person who's not going to trash Corbyn, not going to trash Blair, but try and take some of the best bits of those different, very different figures and make something new? I don't agree with the idea that we have to go back to Blairism to win power. The country, and in particular the Labour Party, have obviously moved on. I think it's possible to have a left-wing platform which is delivered with someone who can command a kind of trust and authority and has a credibility. Because what we keep hearing is that there are bits of Labour's platform which were very popular, but no one believed that Labour was capable of delivering it. And it was almost as though Labour had moved on from the 2017 manifesto, which is actually quite moderate, quite mainstream, quite popular actually. And they thought, well, we have to turn it up to 11 now because we've already done that. So, for example, we never ever heard about tuition fees, for example, this last election, because Labour worried, I suppose, that they'd be rehashing old ground. But actually, the pledge to abolish tuition fees was extremely popular in 2017, would have been extremely popular now, but no one ever talked about it. So it wasn't really on people's radar when they went to vote in the polls. And so they just tried to do too much. So I think that the person best placed to do that is Keir Starmer. That's the person I'll be voting for. And I sort of think that we need to be pragmatic. And I think I say that to all people of the Labour Party, that, I would not describe myself as a centrist. I actually got behind the vast majority of Jeremy Corbyn's platform, and I would have been very, very happy to see him as Prime Minister. But I do think that you will help more people if you win a government, if you win power from the centre, than if you lose power from the left. Yeah. What we have to be pragmatic. We are not going to get everything we want. And for people to say, well, we're not going to, I can't get everything I want from someone like Keir Starmer, so I'm going to go for someone who will be eaten whole by Boris Johnson and devoured then in the 2024 election, which I'm afraid to say is Rebecca Long-Bailey. That, for me, is not putting the best interest of the people at heart.
Olivia, we've moved on to Keir Starmer. He seems, as Jonathan said, he's had the experience. He's held office. He's been a shadow secretary of state. Is he someone who can win votes from, for example, disaffected Conservative voters, perhaps who don't like the direction that Boris Johnson's going?
From what I've seen, yes, I think he probably can. I'm pro Boris Johnson, but I agree with Tobias Ellwood that this country needs a strong opposition and Boris Johnson should be held to account, as any governing party should. And I think Keir Starmer probably can do that. He's forensic on the detail. He knows his stuff. Also, what I think's quite... what I like about Keir Starmer, and I think is probably why we need someone like that, is his willingness not just to reach out across the Labour Party, but to reach out across the House of Commons. I noticed when the withdrawal bill, not the last time the withdrawal bill went through, but the first time it was agreed, just before Christmas, Keir Starmer went across the House of Commons. He's been fighting for Remain for 4 years. He's dedicated so much time to the cause of Remain. And when the withdrawal bill got through, he very warmly shook hands with Steve Barclay, the Conservative Brexit Secretary.
Yeah, I've forgotten about that. You're right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and he's managed to do that without, it's not at all sycophantic. You know what Keir Starmer believes. He's very clear about what he believes, but he's prepared to talk to people who he doesn't agree with and respect those people. And I think that's going to be so important. I think part of why Jeremy Corbyn turned people off is because he sort of put himself on this platform as, I have all the morals, I know what I'm talking about. If you don't agree with me, then you're against me. And I think the way that Keir Starmer would be able to reach out to illusion conservative voters is to say, yes, I see where you're coming from. Yes, I understand that. I'm offering you this. Can you? And that's a much better way to bring people on board than I know it all. If you don't agree with me, go off and join the Tories, because they will go off and join the Tories, and they did.
I mean, I kind of just despaired about that whole movement about only Corbyn has the answers, and I really did feel. Look, Long Bailey seems to me like a profoundly decent person who has the best
There's a question of any of them not being decent
But
people.
the idea that when she said that whole thing about 10 out of 10 for Corbyn, it struck me with piercing clarity that this kind of idea is that it doesn't matter if you win or lose, provided you have the moral victory. And that, for me, is simply not enough, because it's not about our faction of the Labour Party, it's about the people of this country.
And it rings those alarm bells of the sort of almost like a sect, or this sort of blind following of a leader that's beyond any sort of criticism. The idea...
Exactly.
I mean, the idea that Jeremy Corbyn is blameless in all this, and the idea that everything is due to the way the press treated him, when Ed Miliband had exactly the same treatment. Gordon Brown before him
was savaged.
Also was savaged by the press.
Press wasn't that kind to Theresa May.
Press wasn't that kind to Theresa May, but they ended up supporting her. But the idea that Jeremy Corbyn was blameless in all of this is just laughable. He didn't help himself, I think, when he came out. I think it was The Observer, the weekend after the election, where he said we lost the election but we won the argument, which was a ridiculous thing to say. But there is that I don't think Rebecca Long Bailey has helped herself. Jonathan, before we go, you made a point in the break, which I think is worth discussing, which is for the Remain supporting people. The majority of people in this country in this last general election did not vote for parties that were supporting Brexit. Again, it wasn't a huge difference, and we know that the polls haven't hugely shifted.
Yeah.
They're marginally in favour of Remain, but there hasn't been that massive shift where we've seen it go to 70% Remain and 30% Leave. So we're still sort of quite split. But what happens to supporters of Remain now?
Well, I think that the most important thing is that there are millions of people who are, as we've said, who are extremely distressed by what's happening. And there has to be an outlet for that opinion. Now, all of us are accepting that Brexit will happen. It's not about stopping Brexit. It's about having an outlet for pro-EU sentiment and maybe rejoin sentiment that we can fight our case and we can hold the government to account, even when it's not fashionable, even when we feel that our backs are up against the wall. But what we've learned in the last 4 years is that things happen very, very fast and often very unpredictably, and things might go wrong very quickly. They might not, but there will come a point, maybe in 3 years, maybe in 30, maybe not in our lifetimes, when people will start to think about what they want from this country. And I think that we have to do the quiet groundwork from now until then, where we are ready to fight that case for rejoining the European Union as and when the country is behind us. Because 52% of the people voted for parties last month who were either in favour of a referendum or in favour of Remain outright. And there has to be some outlet for that opinion.
Olivia, do you think that the Boris Johnson administration, we haven't even mentioned the word Dominic Cummings during the show, which is a first. But do you think that, not special provisions, but do you think that Boris Johnson is aware, when he stood on the steps of Number 10 after winning the election, he did acknowledge the votes that were lent to him by Labour supporters. Do you think he is just as aware of the facts of what Jonathan just said, that actually the majority of voters didn't vote for parties that supported Brexit? Is he conscious at all of trying to bring those people along, or do you think he's just got an 80 seat majority, he's just going to get on and do what he wants?
No, I think he's very concerned about bringing those people on board because he can't win another election without them, and he can't win another election without keeping the red wall that he's taken this time. And I think the way he's doing that is moving the conversation on. It's not about Brexit. It's about, we leave the EU, but then anything can happen. We could completely realign. A new government could totally realign with the EU and we could practically be in again. It's not a question of whether or not we're in the EU. It's a question of what happens now. So I think his way way of getting over those divisions and bringing Remainers on board is to stop talking about Brexit as though it's something which divides the country, because it needn't be particularly. It's just about how this country moves forward. Now we're technically out of the EU.
The word is going to be banned after the 31st of January. I don't know if that ban applies to me as well, but Boris
I
Johnson's
think that
certainly
you're allowed to
banning
say
it.
I'll be saying it.
Will you be saying it?
I'll be saying
Brexit.
Well, it was my organisation that came up with the word, so of course I'll be
Really?
saying it. Yeah.
I don't know that.
Was
In
it really?
2012, yeah, it's Peter Wilding, the director, who coined it in a blog post after Grexit, which is obviously the
Yeah.
Greek exit from the euro.
Well, that didn't happen.
Well, neither was this until a few weeks ago.